All right, everybody, welcome back. And look, I am going to be honest with you right out of the gate. This one brings me back. This takes me back to those wild days of pistol braces, bump stocks, all that chaos that was cooking off a few years ago, where every other week there was some new ATF rule dropping that was turning law-abiding Americans into potential felons overnight. Remember how exhausting that was? One or two rules had the entire gun community on fire. Well, buckle up, because what just dropped from the ATF and the Trump DOJ is not one rule. It is not two rules. It is not even 10 rules. We are talking about 30 proposed and final rule changes that have just been unveiled. 30. And I want to make sure you hear that number clearly, because the mainstream coverage of this, to the extent that it exists at all, is either getting the scope completely wrong or focusing on one or two politically spicy items while ignoring the stuff that is actually going to change your day-to-day life as a gun owner. So here is what we are going to do today. We are going to power through all 30 of these. I am going to give you the plain language version of what each one says, what it actually means in practice, and which ones I think are genuine wins, which ones are missed opportunities, and which ones I am still waiting to see the fine print on before I celebrate. Because as anyone who has watched this channel for any length of time knows, the devil is always in the details with ATF rulemaking. What the summary says and what the actual regulatory text does are not always the same animal. Quick note before we dive in. What we are covering today is based on the summaries released directly from the ATF. The full regulatory text for many of these is not yet published on regulations.gov as of right now, so we are working from what the agency has put out. That means my analysis is going to be based on what they are telling us these rules do. When the full text drops, I will be back to go through the specifics. Make sure you post in the comment section below which of these you want me to prioritize for a deep dive, because follow-up videos are absolutely coming on several of these. Now let us get into it. The Trump DOJ and ATF have organized these 30 rules into categories. We have got the Repeal Group, the Modernize Group, the Reduce Burden Group, the Clarify Group, and the Align Group. We are going to go through each category and hit every single rule. Starting with the Repeal Group, because honestly, this is where most of you are going to want to pay the closest attention first. Rule number 1. Removing the stabilizing brace rule. This is the rescission of the Biden-era 2023 rule that reclassified pistols with stabilizing braces as short-barrel rifles. For anyone who needs a refresher, that rule took what had been a legal, widely used firearm accessory, turned it into an NFA item overnight, and in doing so, made millions of law-abiding Americans potential felons unless they registered their pistol brace-equipped firearms, destroyed them, or turned them into the government. It was one of the most aggressively anti-gun regulatory moves in recent memory, and it was dressed up in the language of safety and compliance. This rule takes that off the books. Stabilizing braces go back to being what they always were before Biden's ATF decided to rewrite the law without Congress. Big win. Genuinely big. I will take it. Rule number 2. Revising the engaged in the business definition. A lot of you may not deal with this one directly, but trust me, it affects you whether you know it or not. The Biden-era expansion of this definition created enormous uncertainty about when a private individual selling firearms needed an FFL, and it created real legal exposure for both private sellers and for licensed dealers. My law firm dealt with a significant number of FFL clients who were navigating heightened scrutiny under this expanded definition and, frankly, losing sleep over it. The practical result of that rule was yet another mechanism for turning ordinary gun owners and small firearms businesses into potential criminals. Rescinding the Biden expansion of this definition is the right call. Good rule. Rule number 3. Revising the machine gun definition and bump stocks. Curious. Look, we all know how this ended. The Supreme Court in Garland versus Cargill made it absolutely clear that bump stocks do not make a firearm a machine gun under the statutory definition. The ATF lost that argument at the highest possible level. What this rule does is align the regulatory text with the statute and with what the Supreme Court actually said. Is the net practical impact at this point basically zero because Cargill already settled the legal question? Yes. But cleaning up the regulatory text to match reality is still the right thing to do. And I will take a virtue signal win when it comes attached to actual regulatory cleanup. Fine. Rule number 4, removing the Youth Handgun Safety Act notice requirement. So if you have ever bought a handgun from a licensed dealer, you know the stack of paperwork and disclosures that gets handed to you at the counter. Part of that goes back to a 1994 law that required FFLs to push out specific notices related to the Youth Handgun Safety Act. The thinking at the time was awareness. The reality, 30-plus years later, is that this is a paperwork burden that has long since outlived whatever purpose it was supposed to serve. Removing it is a modest win for reducing regulatory overhead on FFLs. Not a landmark change, but the right direction. Now we move into the modernized category, and this is where my feelings get a little more mixed, and I am going to be honest with you about why. Rule number 5, revising Form 4473. For those who do not know, this is the background check form you fill out every time you purchase a firearm from a licensed dealer. I personally try to speedrun mine. If you can get under a minute, you are doing well. This revision purportedly streamlines ID and residency verification, extends how long a NICS background check remains valid before it expires, authorizes electronic form completion, including auto-population and digital record attachments, and incorporates prior ATF rulings into formal regulations. In concept, promising. In practice, I want to see the actual text before I celebrate. Streamlining the process of buying a firearm is good. The devil is going to be in what exactly the electronic version looks like and what data it captures. We will watch this one closely. Rule number 6, firearms electronic recording. This formally authorizes FFLs to maintain Form 4473 and acquisition and disposition records electronically rather than on paper. It standardizes what had previously been handled case by case through individual variance requests. Now look, I understand the appeal here. Reducing the paperwork burden on dealers is genuinely good for the industry. But I am also old enough to remember that pen and paper records have a certain beautiful inefficiency to them. There is something about a government regulatory body not having instant digital access to every firearm transaction ever recorded that I find deeply and constitutionally comforting. I am not against this outright, but I am watching it carefully. Digitizing records is a slippery slope, and I want to see the access and retention provisions before I call this a win. Rule number 7, firearms records retention periods. Okay, I want to be real with you on this one. I did a video about this previously. I am not a fan of where this landed, even though it did move in the right direction. What this rule does is replace the Biden-era indefinite retention requirement for firearm records with defined periods of 20 or 30 years for Form 4473 and A and D records. Look, the overwhelming majority of firearm traces, when you actually look at the data, happen within the first 10 to 12 years after a sale. So a 20 to 30-year retention period is longer than the data actually justifies. And the concern about indefinite retention was not just bureaucratic. It was about the federal government quietly operating a de facto firearms registry, which is not only ethically problematic, but raises serious constitutional and statutory questions. Moving from forever to 20 or 30 years is better than forever. I will acknowledge that. But they had a real moment here for something much better, including potentially a much shorter window that actually maps to trace data. They chose to be okay when they could have been great. The rule also sets a 90-day retention for private party transfer records and voluntary handler checks, and a 5-year retention for multiple sales reports, theft and loss reports, and incomplete transactions. Again, better than what Biden's ATF put in place, not as good as it should have been. Rule number 8, licensee easy check verification. This allows FFLs to verify another licensee's status using ATF's online system and eliminates the old requirement to obtain a certified paper copy of the transferor's license. A bit niche. If you are an FFL and you know what I am talking about, you are probably nodding. If you are not, this one probably does not affect your day-to-day much. Moving on, rule number 9, non-over-the-counter firearms transactions. This purportedly allows FFLs to conduct non-counter sales to in-state residents more efficiently using modern photo ID verification while maintaining all Brady Act background check requirements. I am genuinely going to wait and see the text on this one before I form a strong opinion. The concept sounds reasonable. I want to know the details before I call it. Now we get into what the DOJ and ATF are calling the reduce burden category. And honestly, this is where some of the most practically significant changes for regular gun owners live. Rule number 10, interstate transport of NFA firearms. I have got friends who are going to be very happy about this one, and they know who they are. This rule purportedly removes the requirement to get ATF advance approval before transporting an NFA firearm across state lines for 365 days or fewer. For anyone who owns a suppressor, a short-barrel rifle, a short-barrel shotgun, a machine gun, or any other NFA item, you know what a logistical headache the current advance approval requirement is. You know how long it takes. You know the uncertainty involved. Removing that prior approval requirement for shorter-term travel is a meaningful quality of life improvement for NFA owners across the country. Important caveat. I cannot say this clearly enough. Do not assume this is in place yet. Do not grab your NFA firearm and start crossing state lines based on a summary document. The actual rule is not fully published as of now. Long-term transport, they are saying, still requires notice, but not prior ATF approval. And nothing about this changes underlying state and local registration or notification requirements. Check your local laws. Know the rules where you are going and where you are coming from. But conceptually, love this one. Rule number 11, joint NFA registration for spouses. This is a genuinely big deal, and I want to make sure everyone hears it clearly. This rule purportedly allows married couples to jointly register as NFA firearm makers or transferees, which means both spouses can possess an NFA item without one of them needing to be completely excluded from access. It also means a transfer between jointly registered spouses would not count as a new NFA transfer, which has enormous practical implications. I cannot tell you how many people have come to me or contacted this channel worried about the criminal exposure that existed when a spouse left a suppressor on the kitchen counter and stepped out to run errands. Under the current framework, that could theoretically be an unauthorized transfer of an NFA item, a potential felony, for both people involved. This rule addresses that. It eliminates the primary reason many people formed NFA trusts just to allow both spouses legal access to a suppressor or SBR. Now, I am absolutely not bashing NFA trusts. There are still plenty of excellent reasons to have one, and I would encourage you to talk to a qualified attorney about your specific situation. But removing that particular driving factor from the equation is a win. We are still going to need to see what the final text looks like, but the concept here is excellent. Rule number 12, removing the Chief Law Enforcement Officer notification requirement, also known as the CLEO requirement. For NFA applications, this removes the requirement to send copies of your application to your local Chief Law Enforcement Officer. The CLEO requirement had faced significant legal challenges over the years and had not achieved whatever its intended purpose was in any meaningful or consistent way. Getting rid of it is the right call. Rule number 13, interstate transportation protections. This is another one I genuinely love, with a caveat. This rule formally recognizes that routine travel stops, things like stopping for gas, overnight stays, vehicle maintenance, medical care, food, the basic necessities of traveling like a human being, are covered under the Firearm Owners Protection Act protections when you are traveling with a firearm. For anyone who has ever driven through certain states while transporting firearms and held their breath every time they needed to stop for anything, this matters enormously. I have heard more horror stories than I can count about people passing through states with restrictive firearms laws who were terrified to stop for a bathroom break because of the legal uncertainty around whether any stop constituted a violation of their transport status. This rule says, no, normal human travel activities are covered. Love it. The caveat, and it is a significant one, is that federal regulatory clarity does not automatically change what a state like New Jersey or Illinois will actually do when their troopers pull you over. If a state decides they are not going to recognize the Firearm Owners Protection Act regardless of what ATF says, you are still potentially facing a serious legal situation even if you are ultimately right. Know the laws of every state you are traveling through. This rule also purportedly updates requirements for transporting ammunition and firearm accessories and clarifies how firearms must be secured during transit. Details matter here. Watch for the text. Rule number 14. Machine gun transfers between qualified licensees. This simplifies transfer rules for two specific and narrow situations: government demonstrations and business closures, and aligns regulations more closely with Gun Control Act authority. All NFA requirements and federal licensing controls remain fully in place. Niche, but important for those it affects. Rule number 15. Special Occupational Tax Clarification. This clarifies that an FFL owes one SOT per business activity per location, regardless of how many other GCA licenses it holds. If you are an FFL dealing with SOT obligations, and this has been a source of confusion or inconsistent guidance, this rule is designed to give you more clarity and consistency. Good cleanup rule. Rule number 16. Plastic explosives import filing. This removes an outdated requirement to submit a form in triplicate where current ATF processing does not actually require 3 copies. No substantive import requirements change. This is purely administrative cleanup. If you are in the plastic explosives import business and this affects you, great. If you are not, let us keep moving. Into the clarify category now. Rule number 17. Firearm activities in foreign trade zones and customs bonded warehouses. This extends the existing import exclusion that applies to foreign trade zones to also cover customs bonded warehouses and removes restrictions limiting FFL activities in those locations to storage only. If you know what a foreign trade zone or customs bonded warehouse is and you operate in that space, this may be significant for you. If you do not, this one is probably not your concern. Rule number 18. Importing dual-use frames, receivers, and barrels. This clarifies that FFLs may import dual-use components if a sporting configuration exists at the time of importation, and that once imported, the component may be used in a sporting, non-sporting, or NFA firearm as long as other federal laws are followed. For anyone who enjoys European firearms or other imported components that have been caught in regulatory uncertainty, this could be meaningful. The details will determine the scope of impact, but the directional movement here is good. Rule number 19. Importing training rounds. This clarifies that inert marking and simulated projectile training rounds are not regulated as ammunition under the Gun Control Act when not designed for use in a conventional firearm. This provides regulatory certainty for importers, manufacturers, and law enforcement suppliers, reduces cost and compliance burden. Good rule. Rule number 20. Converting temporary to permanent imports. This creates a formal process to convert a temporarily imported firearm to permanent import status via ATF Form 6 and eliminates various re-export requirements. Cleanup rule with practical benefits for importers operating in this space. Rule number 21. NFA makers adopting existing manufacturer markings. This one has me cautiously optimistic. This allows individuals making NFA firearms through a Form 1 by modifying existing firearms to adopt the original manufacturer's markings rather than adding their own redundant additional markings. What this could potentially mean in practice is that you may no longer be required to have your Form 1 NFA firearms engraved with additional markings. We are going to need to see the actual text to know exactly how this works, but the concept is something I have wanted to see addressed for a long time. Cautiously excited. Surprised, rule number 22. Delivery to common carrier during travel. This clarifies that physically retaining control of your firearm while traveling aboard a common carrier does not constitute delivery of that firearm to the carrier. This addresses long-standing ambiguity for travelers about whether retaining their firearm while using common transportation triggered some kind of transfer or delivery under the law. Important clarification, especially given how some states like Washington have approached transfer definitions. Rule number 23. Revising mental health definitions. This modernizes the language in the prohibited persons framework, replacing outdated terminology and clarifying that receiving assistance in only one functional area does not automatically make someone a prohibited person. This matters because there has been a persistent effort in certain circles to use the mental health prohibited person category as broadly as possible, to the point where some advocates would argue that anyone on any kind of medication for any mental health condition should be considered prohibited. This rule starts to put some guardrails around that interpretation. It also separates the committed to a mental institution category from the mental defective category for cleaner application. Good directional movement. Rule number 24. Brady Act background check permit exceptions. This clarifies when a state-issued permit can serve as a valid substitute for a NICE's background check and what specific requirements that permit must meet, including being valid, unexpired, and issued under a statute meeting specific congressional requirements. Cleanup rule. Adds clarity where there has been inconsistency. Rule number 25. Biological sex on ATF forms. Alright, I told you this one was going to get attention, and it absolutely will be all over the internet if it is not already. This requires individuals to enter their biological sex on ATF forms, consistent with Executive Order 14168, defining biological sex as the immutable classification of male or female and not including gender identity. I am not here to talk you into or out of whatever view you hold on this issue. What I will tell you is that this is going to generate significant political and legal controversy, and the coverage of the broader 30-rule package is going to be dominated by this one item, while many of the genuinely impactful rules I just walked you through get almost no attention at all. You have been warned. Rule number 26. Definition of a business premises. This clarifies that adjoining or adjacent, and here is your vocabulary word of the day, contiguous properties sharing a parking lot, sidewalk, or road count as a single FFL business premises, resolves ambiguity for licensees operating across multiple adjacent buildings or parcels. Practical cleanup for FFLs in that situation. Rule number 27. Straw purchase clarification. As a former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, I want to spend an extra moment here because this matters more than it might appear on the surface. Straw purchases are a real problem. They represent genuine criminal conduct. And yet, the prosecution rate for referred straw purchase cases has historically been embarrassingly low. We are talking single-digit percentages in some jurisdictions. If you are going to argue that we need more background check requirements, you might first want to explain why we are not prosecuting the straw purchase violations that current background check requirements are already generating. This rule purportedly provides clearer guidance on what does and does not constitute a straw purchase and is intended to help FFLs identify legitimate transactions while supporting enforcement against actual straw purchases. The devil will absolutely be in the details here. But the concept of making this clearer, rather than leaving it as a zone of ambiguity that creates exposure for honest dealers while letting actual straw purchasers walk, is the right direction. Rule number 28. Defining willfully for FFL violations. This formally defines what willfully means in ATF regulations for purposes of FFL license suspension, revocation, and civil penalties. It implements the standard from the Supreme Court's Bryan versus United States ruling. If you are an FFL and you want me to do a dedicated deep dive on what this means for your specific legal exposure, let me know in the comments. The demand will tell me how quickly to prioritize that follow-up. And into the final category, the Align group. Rule number 29. Conforming NICS checks to NFA making applications. This spells out ATF's existing practices when approving NFA making applications and aligns the regulatory text with current statutory requirements and operational practice, essentially tying together what the law says, what the regulations say, and what the agency actually does. Always a good thing when those three are pointing in the same direction. Rule number 30. NFA tax remittance changes. And we are saving what is arguably one of the most consequential for last, at least for the NFA community. This amends NFA regulations to reflect reduced tax remittance rates enacted under the One Big Beautiful Act. And in plain language, that means this is the regulatory cleanup that aligns the rules with the change that dropped the NFA tax from the historic $200 down to $0 for suppressors and other NFA items. $0. The legislative change happened. This rule makes the regulatory text match it. For anyone who has been waiting to pick up a suppressor without that $200 tax stamp cost on top, this is the formal regulatory recognition of that change. We will take it. All right. Bottom line on all 30 of these. I like the majority of what I see in the repeal and reduce burden categories. The Biden-era rules that turned law-abiding Americans into potential felons overnight through regulatory overreach deserve to be reversed, and several of them are being reversed here. The joint NFA spousal registration, the interstate transport protections, the brace rule rescission, the suppressor tax alignment. Those are genuine wins, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. The modernize category has me watching carefully. Reducing paperwork burden on FFLs is good. Digitizing records in ways that could expand government access to transaction data is something I want to see the fine print on before I celebrate. And the records retention rule, while better than what Biden's ATF put in place, was a missed opportunity for something meaningfully better. They had the moment. They chose to be adequate. And on the straw purchase and mental health definition rules, the direction is right, but the outcome depends entirely on the language of the actual text, which we have not seen in full yet. Here's the thing I always come back to with any administration's ATF rulemaking, Republican or Democrat. The Trump administration can move the ball significantly at the federal regulatory level. What it cannot do is be the state of New Jersey. It cannot be Illinois or California or Washington or Massachusetts. Those states are going to keep doing what they do regardless of what the federal rulebook says, and some of these wins are going to get complicated at the state and local level in ways that the ATF summaries do not fully capture. Check your local laws, know your state, and keep moving the ball forward, because this is not a moment to sit back and assume the work is done. This is a moment to understand what just changed, protect the wins, and keep pushing. Post your questions in the comments below. Tell me which of these 30 rules you want me to go deep on first. The full regulatory text is coming, and when it drops, I will be here breaking it down line by line. Do not forget to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell, because the follow-up content on this is going to come fast. I will see you in the next one. Take care.